So creating experience and hypnosis for behavioural and emotional change. So why would you do that? What would the purpose be in doing that? Well, we're going to address that as we go along. But one thing to think about too is that I want to go over the evolution of the brain. I think it's really important to get an idea about the evolution of the brain without putting everyone to sleep, so to speak. So let's think of it this way, before we sort of crack on and move on that area. I think that there are different ways to communicate. Okay, what are the ways to communicate is through story, metaphor. There's a lot of different ways we can communicate to people, creating experiences with people. You're probably wondering why you would do that. Okay, anyone know why we would use gesture, signification to communicate? Any reasons why we would do that in adverse to just conventional conveying information factually? Any reasons why you would do that? Well, I'm going to sort of touch on that as we go along. There's a method in the madness. Before I sort of carry on and go forward, I think it's really important for me to sort of give credit where credit's due. I would feel uncomfortable doing a seminar like this, and I do a lot of them like this, but I do other stuff too. I've studied many different modalities without crediting one of my mentors. I never met Milton Erickson. He sort of passed away by the time I came into the scene. But Dr. Jeff Zeig, who set the Erickson Foundation, I've sort of trained extensively under for a long time, and he trained under Erickson for a long time too. And whilst I didn't meet Erickson, the influence is there, and I feel that it's really important to give Jeff credit. If nothing else, if he stumbles upon the video, he'll probably be wondering why I haven't credited his work, and his works will influence me as well as the other stuff I do too, as you're probably aware of. Now, Erickson, was really important to sort of take note, he wasn't an indirect communicator. His process was indirect, but he was communicating a concept. He was stimulating a realization. So he wasn't indirect in a sense, but the way he would communicate was indirect. So you could experience a realization. Okay, you have those epiphanies, those moments, so to speak. Can everyone sort of see the slides okay at the back? Okay, yeah. Okay, that's good. That's good. Okay, so the key thing really going to touch on is it's about therapy is really about going from maladaptive to an adaptive state. I think sometimes that sort of gets forgotten in people, in the intricacy and the sophistication of the way we do what we do. That's the sort of key thing, and going from maladaptive to adaptive is the key process. Now, I want to touch on the brain and the brain's evolution now. We can all sort of see that from the back if you need that. You need the slides, I can email you too the slides if you want to. But I'm going to cover a few million years in a short few minutes. Now think about it for one moment. Millions of years ago, simple organisms. So you clap your hands and, you know, like those fish in a pond go one way, the other way. So you sort of go back all those years ago towards the way stimulus. All those years ago. That sort of changes in due course. As sort of gets more sophisticated, you have a spinal cord and you get more complex reflexes. Okay? A little bit more complex. And the spinal cord, you've got like a brainstem. And the brainstem is an outgrowth of the spinal cord, so it becomes a bit more sophisticated. And what happens then is you're able to do things like your heart and lungs. You don't tell yourself to breathe, it happens automatically. Okay? So you breathe, your heartbeat, it's all automatic. You don't need to tell yourself to do that. So what we do, then we do a hypothalamus. And the hypothalamus is a really important part of the brain because it develops from really primal behavior and it becomes a bit more complex. So what does the hypothalamus do? Well, it's about the size of an almond, the structure, and it regulates important primal behaviors. And the primal behavior it does do is controls basic behavior. It controls things like appetite, thirst, reproduction. It also controls motivation, but not the motivational drive like you coming here tonight. The motivation as in thirst, appetite, reproduction. And the irony is that I wasn't part of this, by the way, it's animal cruelty, but years ago when I did experiments on cats and dogs, they would cut parts of the brain out and the cats and dogs would be able to do basic functions without parts of the brain, just hypothalamus. And that shows you how important that is. So that receives a lot of input from various areas of the brain, and it tells us about basic information, our well-being. Okay, so that's that homeostasis. It's about your well-being. It regulates, and we'll sort of touch on that as we go along. And that's important to sort of make note of that because it knows when to be awake, you know when to go to sleep, you know when to hunt, when to run away. So the zeta, and it correlates with circadian patterns. So your cortisol levels in the morning, when it's light, they go up, and then they start to drop down. And your cortisol levels are lowest in the evening when it's about, say, 9, 10 in the evening, it starts to get darker. And that probably coincides with evolutionary history, where in the beginning, at light, you could be hunted by a predator. And at night, you would probably need time for rest. Hence, when I sort of do well-being talks with organisations, I always say, moderate your day. Plan your day in a way where you don't really pick up stressful emails in the evening, avoid caffeine in the evening, and sort of moderate your day in accordance with your circadian rhythm. Because sleep hygiene is really important. If you're not sleeping well, you probably won't get very far doing therapy. You need to get sleep to heal, but that's not a story for another day. So that comes with input from the hippocampus and the amygdala. Amygdala is 2 parts. It's not just one structure. And this part of the brain has received a lot of traction in the last few years. Anyone come across that before? It's not just for fear. It's not just involved in fear response. It's one of the things it does. It's the amygdala because there's 2 structures. There's one on either side. Now, the important thing about that is memories input to the hypothalamus tells us what we've learned before. So, for example, I could be walking down the street. If someone jumps out at me while I'm walking down the street, then I'm going to have an experience where I'm going to record that in the brain, so to speak. So let me give an examples of the amygdala in action. So years ago, I was 14, 15, I'm walking home from school, and as I'm walking home from school, this guy sort of jumps out at me from his house, and all of a sudden, he starts screaming in my face. And he had what I thought was a knife or something like that, but I don't know. And at that point, I sort of froze. I didn't know what to do, as you do. He went away, and I walked home, and I sort of mentioned it to friends and family, and so to speak, and they kind of, no one really sort of brushed it off, I think. But then I decided not to walk down that street after school for a few days. But when I decided to walk home from school, do you know what happened? I could sort of hear him. I could feel the adrenaline, even though he wasn't there. And I was debating, what should I have done? Should I have hit him back? Should I have ran? What should I have done? And that's the sort of amygdala in action. But we'll touch it as we go along. But importantly, the hypothalamus gets input from the serotonin and noradrenaline. And as I mentioned, it's primal behaviour. Okay? So we're kind of making our way now, a few million years in a few minutes. But the point being is that, so we reach over to the brainstem, it correlates to regular organ functioning, then it gets more complex, hypothalamus, okay? And the next part in the journey is the limbic system and hippocampal, okay? And then I mentioned the amygdala briefly, and that's involved in emotions, connections, memory bias, and crucial development, okay? And the key point there is that each time a new part evolves, another one builds on top of that. So this is why we have deep parts of the brain under the surface of the cortex. Okay, so you've got these primal ancient parts of the brain, which are important because the limbic system and the hippocampal formation are quite deep in the brain. You can sort of see there's a lot of depth there. It's still quite ancient and primal, so to speak. It's raw emotions. Okay, so I know the guy wasn't there, but I still felt scared. But I knew he wasn't there. And we can sort of hypothesize people who've got, say, PTSD, that's ongoing. Okay, it's ongoing. The danger's gone, but the brains record the danger, so an air conditioner goes off, and it reminds them of an aircraft, or they might hear something. The brain's really implicit. Okay, so fear, happiness, and these raw emotions get separated from the frontal lobes, which we'll sort of touch on very briefly. So the limbic system is involved in long-term memories, emotional responses, and affect how we behave. Emotions act as drivers. Okay, they act as drivers. They're fuel for actions and behaviours. That's emotions as a general rule. Okay, they're warning signals. They develop, and we develop the emotional system, and on top of a more basic survival system. So we sort of cruise along, as you do, and as we sort of move forward. If you can, yeah. Okay, on top of the limbic system, we've got a cognitive model. Okay, so the cognitive model where we have verbal communication. So if we were to go back 200,000 years ago, if I was to ask Liz at the back, who kindly swapped the slide over for you, I wouldn't have the capacity to do that. I'd grunt. I'd be like, type thing, and she'd probably tell me where to go. But the point being is that we have this capacity. So if the person could think their way through a problem, they would not see a therapist. Okay? That's what we're going to sort of work with throughout the rest of the seminar. They're seeing the therapist for a reason. They can't think their way out of the problem, so they're there for a reason. So it's a little bit like, well, tell me something I don't know type thing. Okay, so we know certain things, but we still do it, so to speak. And the key thing is that the emotional control, the neocortex, it's critical for decision making, executive functioning, for goal setting in the sense what we do next, and so on and so forth. But the point being, from a problem solving point of view, it has its limitations. So we know what the issue is, but we don't have to solve it, so to speak. Any questions so far? Okay. So the limbic system communication is a psychological evolutionary basis of communication. That's what we, from an evolution point of view, we're going to do exercise to target that. So how do animals communicate? Well, they communicate through sign language, they communicate through sound. Okay? Animals don't have the capacity to speak like we do. Okay? They don't communicate the way we do. They don't use verbal communication like we do, which is really useful, but more primal structures of the brain. And I mentioned I've got the amygdala, aversion. The aversion of the amygdala, I know the guy's not there, but I still have that sort of fight, flight, freeze. So maladaptive behaviour is limbic based, for the most part, because the amygdala is telling me a signal, I'm in danger, but I'm not in danger. The guy's not there. But I'm still seeing him. I still have that adrenaline. So, okay, limbic based is what we sort of refer to. So factual information is easy to convey facts. We can convey facts through factual information. But what we can do through factual information is maybe stimulate a realization, so to speak. So tell yourself not to eat the chocolate cake. Okay, we all know, and we've all been there before. People have been on diets, but we struggle to sort of to do that. Okay, so you could tell a teenager. So you tell a teenager, I think you shouldn't smoke. To a teenager, the error of your ways. So the teenager's an idea. The cool uncle smoking, an idea. An association, it's cool, and then the behaviour. And then you as a parent say, don't smoke. Are they hardly going to say, well, gee, it's great advice, Mum or Dad. They're not going to do that. But maybe, or perhaps if you take them to an esteem award, they see, I'm not recommending you doing that by the way, but to give you an example, they see that smoking is not cool. And you have a new behaviour. Does that make sense? Idea, association, behaviour, so to speak. So tell yourself not to love that person, so to speak. So, you know, there are things that we do, we know the answer, but we still do anyway. Who's watched the Titanic, for example? Anyone watched the Titanic? Why did you watch it for when you know what's going to happen? I could have saved you 3 hours of your life. The ship's going to sink. Okay, you still watch it because emotion. You want to experience a feeling. Okay? And I want to sort of cover some key points now before we sort of crack on as we go along. And I want you to sort of see that, you know, human activity exists at it's an open system. Okay? Human activity exists in an open system. And that's really important to know. And the reason being is that one of the reasons that's important to know is that researchers can study human action in the laboratory. So you can study in the laboratory, but what are limitations in the laboratory is that you're very, very cautious making generalizations on everyday life. What happens in a lab under controlled studies might not happen every day. Okay? And that's important sometimes, and I'm going to go into why that's important. Because, you know, the key thing is that human beings are open systems. So two people can drink and smoke, and one doesn't get the diseases associated with smoking and drinking, and one does. There's many variables at play. Not that I'm just used to drink and smoke. I'm just saying that what works for one person might not work for somebody else. Okay? And we're going to touch on as we go along, and that's key. Open system is multifactorial and complex. It's hard to predict in many ways what's going to happen. So human beings are very complex communicative capacities and differentiate. Everyone's got their own unique reality. Okay, everyone sees the world in their own way, their own map. And people are biological organisms from conception, and later they develop psychological factors that become salient for developing the infant child. So, the rat licking experiments that they did, where the rats that received nurturing, because what rat do, they lick the baby, and that's their way of showing affection. Now, in that experiment there, they paired some of the rats up with non-maternal mothers, but some were high licking, some were low licking. And the ones that were licked in that first week showed less anxiety and less aggressive behaviour up to many, many years later. Now, that's obviously not suggesting that people who are nurtured in an environment are going to have less chance. There's a lot of question marks around the experiment, but what you could say is it gives an idea about the epigenetic. Our genes and environment are key factors, really. So potential factors we've got to take into consideration before we sort of crack on. Biological influences on health. So you've got biology is a big factor on health. Infection, trauma, hormone, nutrition, they're all things that we need to sort of consider around health and health behaviour. You've got social factors, psychological factors as well. Attitudes, emotions, self-control. You've got also, social factors, family, peer group, and economic status. Now, the thing is really, you don't choose a lot of that to a point. You don't choose your parents, you don't choose your genes, you don't choose even some social factors as well. So there are a lot of things you don't choose, some things you do choose. You can choose eventually, but the key thing is we want to overcome a reduction approach. We want people to stick to their remit and focus on what their remit is, because certainly if I'm working with people with anxiety, for example, then I would get them to go away and see if it's an organic disorder before I go anywhere near. Hypnosis is useful pain relief, but before they come to do pain relief with me, I told them to go see the GP first, because the pain might be manifesting for a biological reason. That's not my remit to deal with. And I've delivered training before to people, and I delivered training years ago to some chiropractors, and I told them I think they should do that, because one of them said, well, why would you do that? Because if the person's got a tumour in their back and you're treating them for 6 months, they couldn't have got the help they needed. So I think the important thing is that we all work together with our profession going forward, but do bear in mind that there are different factors for our behaviour. It can't be explained by one or two things. So it's been a proven model. The biopsychosocial has been a proven model. It's useful in many ways. And the key thing is, I think for me, what I want to sort of suggest before we sort of go forward in this as well, the notion of separating off biology from psychosocial experiences and development has gone. It makes no sense anymore. Okay, nature-nurture is pretty much dead, to the point that we know now you've got these genes, and the environment has a big influence on how we progress. So the reality is now we're becoming more and more aware, and we are part of a unified whole, in one sense, okay? Which makes a lot of sense why we can all stick to a remit but uncover every stone and have a true holistic approach. And when I say holistic approach, not people who claim to be holistic therapists and they're actually more reductionists, people they call reductionists. I'm saying overturn every stone, okay? And look for biomarkers and get the right people involved in helping the person, and tailor as much as we can do in the world we live in today. In the future it might change, we might be able to do things a little bit different, but for now, we are where we are. Okay, so now going forward in our journey, experiential. Why do we become experiential? Now, I'm going to sort of go into this in more detail. One of the things we can do is stimulate realization. We can reorganize resource states, a reappraisal. So these are things we can do if we are experiential in our therapy. Okay, create an experience for people, or hypnosis is quite useful. Do story, metaphor, gesture, be able to experiment. These are things we can use to help people change and stimulate a realization going forward. So let me give you an example very briefly. Everyone watch The Christmas Carol? Okay, so you've probably watched it before. What happens to Christmas Carol? He doesn't have a sheet of paper. that tells him to change. Okay, Christmas Carol is quite experiential. Christmas Carol where, okay, Charles Dickens, first published in London, but what happens there is Ebenezer Scrooge, he transforms his personality, his identity, his behaviours, his emotions, based on a visit from a former business partner and the spirits of the past, a present, and the ones yet to come. So it's this experience that has a big impact on him in various levels and stimulates a realisation. Okay, so we know the story, obviously, and he transforms. But do bear in mind that there were pivotal moments where he wasn't always the way that he was. Okay, and one moment where he looks back and he sees himself in this situation with his former partner, and sort of cutting a long story short, he's sculpted by his experiences. These experiences sculpt his reality, and he becomes the person he is. But it doesn't mean you can't change. You're not stuck with being the person you are. So the things that happen, it stimulates a realisation. So how he defines who he is as a psychological social effect. It resonates with meaning and alteration of his state. And through doing that, he changes completely. It's a transformation through that experience, whether he really dreams it or not, but he changes the orientation of who he is. Okay? He does more effective patterns, he's a happier and in a better place. So what really happens is as a therapist, by creating a reference experience, the client can achieve a transformation, a realization. The client becomes more adaptive and effective behavior patterns and a conductive identity, or conducive identity, so to speak, a little bit like the film, and we can create experiences for people. So when we create an experience for a person to change their orientation, we can create experiences for people that change identity, for people that, and how you define who you are impacts your behaviour. One referential experience can change someone's identity. Think about it. One moment of turbulence, someone who nearly drowns in the pool. These things have a big impact on us for a long time. These underlying schemas and patterns that sort of stay with us for a while, but we can sort of change that as well too. So idea, association, behaviour is one way of looking at it. So we can stimulate people's idea, behaviour. So significant emotional events that sculpt people's reality. And all these experiences affect people. So someone could have been told off at school for not doing their homework, and then years later they're afraid to do a presentation because they've got the underlying schema and association going forward. But it doesn't have to be that way. They can change. As human beings, we're storytellers. If you listen to people's stories, they'll tell you the cognitive distortions. They'll tell you what you need to know. Okay? And you can change that pattern because we've got a great capacity to generalise. Anyone seen this film before, by the way? Don't rush out and see if you haven't seen it. But the point being is that the capacity to generalise is a useful one. Because if you didn't generalise, you'd be like the person in this film. She's lost her short-term memory, and every day he's got to teach her everything that she learned the day before, that she knew the day before. He's got to show a video, what is love, what is this, and what is the other. So generalisation can be a good thing to a point, but it can also be a dangerous thing too, where behaviour is concerned. And the key thing is really, so is this dog dangerous? Who would say a dog like this is dangerous? Well, it all depends on the experience. And sort of to give an illustration, as a 5-year-old, if you got bitten by this dog, or a type of dog like this, 20 years later, what would you think your opinion would be? If you're walking down the field, you'd probably feel a bit nervous. If that was your best friend as a 5-year-old, you'd probably run across and stroke it. If you never had experience with it, you wouldn't bother at all. So who's right, who's wrong? What's fact, what's opinion? If I say here to the end of the room is a long way, is that fact or opinion? Well, it could be a long way for someone who's got a condition. But equally, if I measure it and I give you a measurement, then it's as fact as it can be. And that's the sort of key thing. A lot of our assumptions are based on opinions and based on very minimal realizations. So we can interrupt the pattern, which is key, and we can install a new pattern going forward, which is key. So we can disconnect. And a big part of hypnosis is disconnecting from a certain reality. It's a little bit like when I did some work and when I was doing this the case study on BBC Radio years ago, BBC Radio Manchester, this woman who wanted to reduce in weight, and one of the blocks and barriers in reduction was her going back swimming again. She hadn't been in a swimming pool for about 56 years, and I felt that if she'd go swimming again, social avoidance, she'd overcome that. and she'd try different things, but every time she fell to the swimming pool, she'd connect to an unresourceful state. It was piggybacking on her. So disconnecting that and connecting to a more resourceful state provided to be a lot more useful, and she obviously went back swimming again and sort of got life back. But the point being, that's one of the components of hypnosis, is disconnect, what we connect to, we disconnect from. So we can reach metaphorically the unconscious part of the brain, okay, the metaphorical part of the brain, and we sort of touched on it earlier, that limbic part of the brain. If we can sort of reach that part of the brain, we've got to. So what we can do, and what I do, is not very conventional hypnosis that you've probably seen on TV before. I mentioned before that mindfulness is very heavy on the Ericksonian model. I have done conventional stuff too, and still do now, but my preference is the Ericksonian model. So you invite people to go into trance. It's not you will go in trance, and the way you invite people into trance is pretty straightforward. Everyday trance. So when you read a book, when you watch a sunset, when you do things that absorb your attention, it's a resourceful state to be in. Okay? If I mention your feet on the floor, your back on the chair, pen in the hand, you probably don't realise until I mention it. And the key thing is really brings you conscious awareness. It's more naturalistic. Okay? It's a naturalistic way of inviting someone to trance, and you link it to an everyday experience. So it's like watching a sunset. You link it to an everyday experience, so to speak, and you guide the person to where they want to go, the adaptive behaviour they want, okay, going forward, and you can sort of create an experience for them. It's a nice natural experience that people can use, and we become absorbed. And why would you do that? Why would you communicate in an indirect way? Well, people, if they could have stopped, they probably would have done already anyway. And what we can do as well, which is quite useful too, another key point, is go to a resourceful state. And what I mean by doing that is that when we are good at doing something, we're generally pretty confident about things, and we're in a better place than we are if we're doing something that we haven't done before. So what we can do is get into more resourceful states. And I use early learning. I get people to focus on what they learnt prior to the maladaptive behaviour. So if you're looking to ride their bike again, we focus on when they first learned to ride the bike. So for example, when I teach people, sometimes I'll say, okay, you learn to speak a language at a very young age. If you've done this, you can do, people who want to speak a new language, if you've done it at that age, you can do now. The brain might be more malleable then, but it's still malleable now, so to speak. So that can be quite resourceful. So we go to a resourceful state, and we'll get a chance to sort of play ball, what you like to do, what you see, hear and feel in a resourceful state. It's a better place to be going forward. And we want to get into a resourceful state. I'll give you some ideas of how we've done that. But the aim of hypnosis, really, one of the aims anyway, is to invite someone to a more relaxed state, to transcend the client to a waking beta state to an alpha state, okay, where they're more susceptible to suggestions. It's a bit like when you sort of get in you listen to the radio in the morning, and a song gets into your head and you can't get out of your head. Haven't people before? So we're more receptive in the morning. It's a sort of state, to explain the state, the way I sort of frame it, it's a state you're in when you get up in the morning and when you sort of go to bed at night. That's sort of alpha theta. We're more susceptible to change in that state, and that's the goal. And why we're getting people to that state is through an experience that is useful to them. So it's not, I'm going to count you down, 5, 2, 1, whatever. It's basically you go to a place where you feel calm and peaceful, okay? So you go to a place, it could be a holiday, a vacation, whatever. And when you're in that state, you become more susceptible to change because the critical factor's down. So it's easy to ride a horse in the direction it's going and steer it to counter resistance, okay? So we're communicating in a way that association is one big component of hypnosis in this way. Time distortion, a bit like Scrooge, he goes back in time, he goes now, he goes in the future. So if you carry on smoking, what will happen in 10 years, in 20 years? If you tie it to your values and so on and so forth, it's going to create an emotional reaction. You go back in past. So time distortion, a bit like you wait for a bus on a nice sunny day, in talking to some nice company, an hour feels like 5 minutes. If it's a rainy, windy day and undesirable company, 5 minutes feels like an hour. So the way we code time is different. So time distortion is really important. And we interrupt the pattern, and we can put together a new pattern. And that's the basis of how things can work, and I'll sort of give you an idea, because communication is best conceived as an art, not a science, in the sense that the way we communicate, we don't have a book that solves every problem. Alteration in mood. Our mood state is key. The mood we're in, how we feel about ourselves. Because think about an appraisal. You walk down the streets and your best friend ignores you and you're in a good mood, you're probably more than likely to text them, are you okay? But if you're in a bad mood, you're probably going to send them a text, why'd you ignore me for? So your state has a big impact on your behavior, the mesh. Okay, you have an appraisal of a situation, your thoughts, and that's obviously all meshed in with your emotion, your behavior, your physiology. So if somehow we can sort of target each area, and certainly your thoughts, then things can potentially correct themselves going forward. Now, the brain is malleable. The brain can change. Neuroplasticity, we know now in neuroscience, okay, that the brain can change. Many years ago, used to say, well, that was it. Now we know neuroplasticity, it can change. The brain can change. Neurogenesis as well, which is different to neuroplasticity. We know we can grow new neurons in parts of the brain by exercise, by eating certain types of food, by studying and learning, which is another story for another day. But it's malleable, and I mentioned earlier the skins we pick up along the way, which are useful. So fire, hot, okay, simplicity, and that's probably a good thing to know that. But generally speaking, there's many generalizations we pick up along the way that don't serve us anymore, and we can tell ourselves not to do it. And the quickest way from A to B is convey facts. Don't eat that cake. Don't smoke. Don't do this, that, and the other. How many people struggle to overcome the issue? So sometimes what we've got to do is go in an indirect way. So telling someone to do something, they would have done already anyway. And that's not criticising, by the way, certain therapies, and certainly not sort of having a go. I've taught talking therapies in the past to staff, or components of them anyway, in care homes. So I think they have their place, like everything has its place. But what I'm saying is that we must sort of look and potentially be creative in certain situations if that allows us to do that. Because if they could have solved the issue, they would have done so already anyway, which is key. So we give people more options to soften the rigidity, because people can be quite, how can we put it? People can be quite resistant, so to speak. The resistance, so we can bypass resistance. Okay, and I think the key thing, enough to keep someone interested, but fire off in a certain way. Okay, so it's a bit counterintuitive, because all through your life you've been told, just get on with it, just do the facts, and this is counterintuitive, and you can sort of be indirect in a way to fire off in a certain direction if need be. Flexibility. It can be done through story, through language. Distraction, for example, you're talking to someone on the phone, the doorbell goes, you get the door, you come back, you forget what you were saying. So we can work ways to get people to change behaviourally by bypassing the conscious mind. So one of the things I sort of picked up on for me, and I said I would credit Jeff for the stuff that I sort of picked up from him, the resistance level is that the more resistant the person you're working with, and over compliance of resistance too, the more you go indirect. So if the person's seeing, if all their families come to see you for various problems that you've solved them all, or helped them solve them all, then you can be more direct. If they've seen the local therapist, the butcher back in Candlestick Lane, and say, all you therapists are the same, you can't help me, then you might go indirect. And for all throughout your life, you probably spoke indirect. If you go back to university days, you probably went out to a nightclub and told someone to come back to your room to see a records collection. We didn't mean that. I know it's being a little bit silly, but precisely, exactly. But the point being is that we speak indirectly, and it can be quite useful in certain situations because the person, it bypasses resistance. And I think for me, language can help change someone's reality as well. I'm going to sort of do, if we've got time, I'll sort of guide, I'll do a gentle process with you to experience it. But memories fade. From a neuroscience point of view, we know that memories fade. So you went away on holiday last year. The day after, you remember it more than you remember it now. Unless obviously the emotional experience you had on there, the emotion, the memory reconciliation, if you had a significant emotional experience like a breakup or something happened like that, then that would be probably as raw then as it is now. But from a centric perceptive point of view, that kind of fades away. Okay, and that's sort of important because we create experiences of people going forward, and we get stuck in these limiting states. So a limiting state, a more empowered state. Okay, we get something into more empowered. So the stories we tell ourselves. Years ago when I was working in professional football, the manager phones me up at midnight. He says, this is his story, because I can't believe we're playing in the League Cup, we're playing against the Premiership team, we're decimated with injuries, how are we going to play the game? Such bad luck, it's all out, just our luck, and all really, really negative. And I said, hang up the phone, call me at an hour, it'll be 1 o'clock an hour, he said. I said, call me anyway. So he calls back an hour, he goes, you know what, it's the one opportunity. We've got nothing to lose, the pressure's all on them. We're in League 2, they're the Premiership team. Can you see a whole different story? Change your perception, change your world. And that feeds off to the players. And there has been evidence, and to quote the literature, suggests that the belief we have, the clients can change, has a big impact on them. And we've seen in the literature, teachers who believe in their students has a big impact on their students' capacity to achieve grades. Huge, huge. So, you know, that's really important to know that. And I mentioned before about hypnotic experiences that we can create for people to link that to where they want to go, to a well-formed outcome, where they want to go, what they want to achieve, to disconnect the pattern and then reinstall a new pattern going forward. So like that guided discovery. So a very quick example before we do, if we've got time to do a few minutes of facilitation. I was working with this woman who, she wanted to start presenting again, and she hadn't presented for many, many years. And one of the reasons was she mentioned that she worked in a very hostile environment. Actually, she was a teacher in authentic institutions, and she had a very, very bad episode on one occasion. She was attacked violently, and that sort of knocked her confidence, and she didn't present for a long time. And one of the things I did working with her, because she tried various things, was I became experiential. So I created an experience for her. I said, what I suggest you do is to go as close parallel to what she wants to achieve. I said, join a martial arts club. She goes, why? I've got no inclination to go and beat the people up who beat me up. I said, no, it's because the schema she had, the reference experience she had was men, because she was attacked by a group of men, and she would really feel anxious when she had to present when men were there. So I said, joining martial arts, you'll be around men who've got control. But if it's too much for you, because I don't believe in, single swimmers, about extend the comfort zone, then don't go. Don't go as much as one can go. So it's a bit like, you go in a pool, you extend the comfort zone. And by joining, she was around men who had control. So it sort of peeled away at the old experience that she was associating to. And then obviously she would, do other strategies like visualization, rehearsal, and bit by bit, step by step, over a period of a few weeks, she got back presenting again. And did what she thought she could never do again. So that's what I'm saying, create an experience for people. They're going to be creative and think, okay, how can we draw a parallel as close as one can get? Okay, which is key, going forward. Creating experience for people. I was delivering components of CBT to staff. One of my remits in the organisation was to deliver components of CBT to staff in care homes, as well as teach the young people too. And the person I was delivering with on her first session, I won't name for confidentiality, she got 19 really good reviews and one really bad review, and that opened up an old schema. So we did all the, very intelligent woman, we did all the cognitive distortion, the labelling and restructuring and so on and so forth. Come back next week again, deliver again. I can't deliver, Jim. Fine, I'm not going to push you to do anything you don't feel comfortable doing. I'll deliver, but we'll deal with it. And one of those we dealt with it was to create an experience for her. We did a behavioural experiment. We did a survey to speak to people what it's like when you first start delivering. I told her myself personally, I'm an introvert in an extrovert world. I'm much happier doing research than standing in front of people speaking, but I do it because I feel I've got information to offer, so I do it, and I do enjoy doing it. But having done that, she got her to join Toastmasters. I'm not on commission, by the way. It's a public speaking group. It's independent of me. But by doing that, she could phase into speaking, experience for her, and then do a gentle hypnosis going forward. and a regression going back. And what the regression revealed was, as a 10-year-old, she got told off not for doing homework and get to the front of the room type thing, and that was an underlying schema there. Whether that was true or not, I don't know. One doesn't know. But the important thing is that she overcome the issue that she had. We can never know. The mind stores so many experiences, but that wasn't the goal. So it's guided discovery going forward. So our repeated experience, and it's been proven by meditators, sculpt the brain. Okay? Our repeated experiences, meditators have got much more compassion. And that's one of my things. I really, really think that we should introduce and roll mindfulness out where it's appropriate, applicable, by the way, with young people, because I think meditation would solve a lot of the, not every issue, but would solve some of the issues if people were a bit more calmer and compassion and taught these key things, really. But that's another story for another day, going forward. But what I'd like to do, and we got I'm sort of lost track of, I've gone into hypnosis myself. Have you got some time left? We'll do a gentle facilitation. Okay, so I'll do a gentle 5 minutes for everybody, and then I'll open up for questions. So if you're comfortable, if you're not comfortable doing the process, you don't have to. It's entirely up to you. If you want to close your eyes, you can do. I'll just do a gentle facilitation with you. Perhaps you want to close your eyes to block out the outside world. If you're not comfortable, it's okay. You don't need to close your eyes. Just pick a spot on the wall. And as you do that, and if you're comfortable closing your eyes, just breathe naturally, normally. And as you breathe naturally, normally, perhaps you become aware of your heartbeat. And as you become aware of your heartbeat, perhaps you notice your breathing slowing down. And as you notice your breathing slowing down, perhaps you notice the sound in the background. And as you notice that sound in the background, perhaps it takes you back to a time you're with friends, family, on a vacation, a holiday, in a nice calm state. I want you to go back to that nice calm state. And as you go back to that state, notice what you see, what you hear, what you feel. And as you become aware of what you feel, notice the sounds, the sights, the colours, the feelings, where the feelings are. A nice peaceful state. And as you go into that state, and so just invite you into a calmer state. And you notice your heart beat slowing down, your breathing slowing down. And as you become aware of that, you can be confident that any challenges you're going through at the moment, you overcome challenges in the past, you'll overcome the ones you're going through now, because you've done it before, you can do it again. And as you do that, you can imagine putting all your thoughts in the bag, put them outside, you can pick them up in 2 minutes if you wish. But now it's your time, a nice, gentle, calm meditation. You're in complete control. All hypnosis is self-hypnosis. And I want you to just get into a state of calmness. Perhaps you can imagine walking on some warm sand, or on a beach, or perhaps in a swimming pool. You dip your feet in the pool, and as you dip your feet in the pool, you feel a little bit of coolness, but then they become warm, and then you go into your knees, and you feel a sensation of cool, and it becomes warm up to your waist, and you walk your way through the pool at a level you're comfortable walking through. You become warmer. If you're comfortable swimming, you can. If not, you can just imagine being calm and the warmth and feeling really at peace. And perhaps you notice the blue sky in the background and gentle warmth of the sun on your back, and as you walk out of the pool, you feel the sun just dry, a nice warmth, and the sun evaporates any stress. And to think that any problems you have, you can think in 100 years, 1,000 years, 1,000,000 years, how significant they'll be anyway, and sort of focusing on the now. The only time we have the now. Past is gone. We can't do a great deal about it. The future hasn't arrived. The only moment you've got now is for sure. And just focus on being in the now. And you might think, and might have goals, and might think, well, how will I achieve my goals? well, you'll achieve your goals, you've got a better chance of achieving them if you bring them in the now anyway. And that goal could be a course, that goal could be learning something new, that goal could be a business goal, but your best chance of achieving it is to bring it into the now anyway. And for now, just let yourself go and let any problems defocus in the background. And you can externalize any stress, and you can imagine physiologically where the stress is stored, and imagine pushing it away, drain the colours, and if it says anything back to you, you can sort of say whatever you feel you want to say back to it. So it's almost like you can pull up a chair in front of you and bring some closure to anything that you're going through, and just nothing major, just something sort of pecking on your mind. You've got to do something, you've got to get something done, and you can just reply in the way you want to reply. I'll do it in my own time, my own pace, I'll get it done, like I've got things done before. Now I'm just going to enjoy and be calm and be in the moment. And as you do that, I'm going to pause for a moment, just let you enjoy the experience, and perhaps you'll have a realisation tonight, perhaps you'll have a realisation when you're reading the paper tomorrow, if you do read the paper, perhaps when you're watching TV, and something will spark in the unconscious mind, and that realisation can sort of take you forward, a step forward in terms of where you want to go. And we've covered a lot of information tonight in a short space of time. And like everything, sometimes you don't know what you're going to say until you say it. And the information we've covered tonight, you probably won't recall it until you need to recall it. And when you need to recall it, you recall it for a reason. So in a moment now, you can come back in your own time, your own pace. If you want to come back, if you don't want to come back, you can stay where you are. I'm sure that you'll get woken up tomorrow morning. Okay, so that sort of brings us to a close. Before I'm going to shut the stream now, and I'm going to open up for questions. So I'll shut the stream so I'll give some privacy for your questions, anything you want to ask me, and we'll sort of go from there. So I'll open for questions. I'll just switch the stream off and then I can open for some questions. Are we okay for questions? We've got 5 minutes. Okay.